My fellow Americans, today I speak to a nation in grief. Yesterday, a school filled with innocent children and caring teachers became the scene of terrible violence, hatred, and evil. We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health.
Right now, I just think we need to take a breath and collect the facts.
This is not the time to jump to some conclusion, not knowing the full facts.
So I just think what you don't do is knee-jerk and say, let's just take away a citizen's rights.
My colleagues from Florida will carry home the prayers of the whole Senate for victims and their families, for the community of Parkland, and for the first responders who bravely charge into harm's way on behalf of others.
Now, on the issue that you've raised about the background checks, relate directly to what you said about the assault weapons ban. It's not the loopholes, it's the problem that once you start looking at how easy it is to get around it, you would literally have to ban every semi-automatic rifle that's sold in America.
I absolutely know these children are heartbroken, but I also know they probably do not have the logistical ability to plan a nationwide rally without it being hijacked by groups that already had the pre-existing anti-gun agenda.
Jack, it's just silly.
The prayers help me tremendously. And unfortunately, there's some on the left that actually mock praying for people. They say, oh, do gun control, don't pray for people.
That's so trite.
I needed those prayers. Those prayers helped me and my family at a really difficult time, and you could feel them. These families need prayer, they need counseling, they need help.
When you talk about instrumentality, are you suggesting that weapons that can kill or injure many people in a short period of time should be more restricted than they are now?
Well, you can certainly look at that, but of course, Nancy, some of the more heinous mass killings we've had involve semi-automatic pistols. And I have had people, when I was a prosecutor, kill with all manner of instrumentality, from shovels to bricks to rope to hands. You're equally dead.
There would be teachers and coaches. If the coach had a firearm in his locker when he ran at this guy, that coach was very brave. Saved a lot of lives, I suspect. But if he had a firearm, he wouldn't have had to run. He would have shot, and that would have been the end of it. And this would only be, obviously, for people that are very adept at handling a gun. And it would be, it's called concealed carry, where a teacher would have a concealed gun on them. They'd go for special training.
Here's my actual in-depth, real video about guns in America. Now, gun enthusiasts, gun fetishists, and American conservatives, I'll just give you an opportunity now to downvote this video. Good, if you haven't already clicked away. And oh yeah, I'll just quickly get this out of the way. Stupid New Zealander! You don't know shit about guns! Mind your own country, it's none of your goddamn business! Get out of it! I have opinions, and I'm going to give them, and if you don't like that, get off my fucking lawn and go watch a different channel. Now that it's everybody else, let's get on with this. The backstory here is that on February 14th of 2018, there was a mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida.
Here's what we know at this hour. At least 17 people have been killed, students and adults. At least 15 injured, and the shooter, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, is in custody. This is the 18th school shooting already this year. It is just mid-February.
A student who had been expelled but had got his hands on some very powerful weaponry went into the school and massacred 17 people. He escaped the scene by blending in with other students, hung around for a while, and then was eventually taken into custody. Now, there's been massive outcry about this particular shooting, even though recently 58 people, I believe it was, were gunned down in Las Vegas in 2017 in an absolutely horrific event, the likes of which the world has barely seen. And that had basically no impact on anything to do with guns It barely moved the gun conversation forward in any sense. It certainly didn't make gun enthusiasts feel at risk about their precious guns being taken away or their ability to buy guns being restricted in some fashion. But this high school shooting is different. And one reason why it's different, and I've seen other people talking about this, is the fact that the kids involved in this shooting, they have social media, they have the internet, and they can speak out, and they've been fighting back. They've been activated, and they're relentless on the issue of guns.
The thing that inspired us to create the march was people saying, you are all talking about gun control, and this is not the time to talk about gun control. This is the time to grieve, the time to mourn. And we understand that. And we said, now might not be the time to talk about gun control. Here's the time to talk about gun control. March 24th, we are going to have so many people in Washington, D.C. So many cities have created their own branch of March for Our Lives. They've all been reaching out to us. They've all been not reaching out to us and taking it into their own hands. It's amazing the universal support we've gotten. I mean, it's proof that this isn't red and blue. This isn't generation versus generation. This is the 97% of people who believe that we need to take steps here together.
And as horrific as the Las Vegas shooting was, there just was not that pushback about guns. There was no people out there to actually advocate for that, and now they have these survivors of this massacre in Florida who can do that. An earlier shooting in Orlando, Florida, at the Pulse nightclub, which left 49 people dead, certainly created a huge outcry about Muslims, because the guy did it was a Muslim and said that he did it because of ISIS. But it really didn't have a huge effect on guns either. And the gun debate. A member of Congress, Steve Scalise, was shot, and that had little to no impact. Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Lee Giffords was shot in the head in 2011 and survived, and she's been fighting hard for gun control and new gun laws. And that's had a positive impact moving those issues forward, but nothing quite like this. And now the gun debate has really taken center stage, and it's really heated up in a way that it hasn't in a very long time. It seemed to many people that no matter how many massacres occurred in that country and how many people got killed, no matter how brazen and how over the top the shootings were, they care more about protecting the guns than actually protecting the children and the people in those situations. But now that it's a real conversation again, and people are actually talking about it, people on the right are beginning to thaw in the sense that they're actually having to acknowledge that there is a problem and think about some solutions beyond even just give everybody guns, give the teachers guns, give the hall monitors guns, give the principal a gun, give the toddlers a gun, give everyone a gun, everybody just needs a gun. That you can see a real sea change on the issue because of these brave, awesome, incredible students. Pursuant to this new era of conversation about the gun issue, I want to comment on some of the main arguments that I've encountered and taken part in from gun advocates. I'm going to go sort of in reverse order with this list from the lowest hanging and most easily debunked without facts or information arguments to, I suppose, the most robust, or at least ones that actually have to cite statistics and so forth about. So let's start with the shittiest arguments. Yes, argument number one, it's because we've lost touch with God, because the children don't believe in Jesus and believe in the baby in the manger. That's why they've all got the guns and they're all killing everybody all the time.
You know, thoughts and prayers might seem laughable to some of you, but maybe, just maybe, more Jesus, more God, more prayer, and more compassion is what we are missing. Those are my final thoughts. Feel free to disagree. From LA, God bless, and take care.
If we just were a godly society, we wouldn't have all of these mass shootings. Now, this doesn't really require any legwork from me to debunk. In comparison to other countries, America is quite religious. I would say my country of New Zealand is significantly more secular than America. I would think that Canada would be more secular than America. I don't think there's any level of correlation or causation between godlessness and mass shootings. But this is one of those kind of arguments that Christopher Hitchens would say, that which can be presented without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Do we have to go into all of these statistics about whether godly people are more or less likely to commit mass shootings? I could have a look around for it, but I'm not sure what could possibly exist in regards to that kind of information. It's very strangely specific. I do think in America, godly people are probably more likely to have guns. Could that increase their risk of using those guns for ill? Yeah, possibly could. And I also think people who live in the demonized city of the moment, Chicago, at least in the poor and neglected areas, and them having guns, would there potentially be a correlation between them having guns and their living situations and shootings? Yeah. What that has to do with God? No idea. I guess it's just because some religious people believe they have the monopoly on morality, but we know from many years of religious scandals and impropriety that that is not true, and that's just a cover for their own human frailty and their own human flaws. This one is one that is really frustrating. It's when you get into a conversation with somebody and you say, it's so terrible that an 18-year-old can buy an AR-15, which is an assault weapon. And they'll say, actually, it's not an assault weapon, it's a semi-automatic weapon. And did you know? It was based on a military weapon, but then it was turned into a civilian weapon, and there's a big difference between the words assault and civilian, and is it even a weapon? No. Weapon is subjective. So you can have an assault weapon's bad, but you don't even know what assault means. An AR-15 can't kill people that much. It's only got a 4% kill rate if you're in a high bodily filled situation. Semantics, 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 therefore let's have guns everywhere at the end. Now this is just an irritating, stupid, low-hanging argument that comes up over and over again. Somebody said, have you ever even fired a gun? And I said, yeah, I've fired a shotgun. Ha! A shotgun? Well, that's not going to give you a good, clear idea of what guns are like, because it's got a massive kickback, and the fire rate is a lot different, and therefore what? I'm a person on the internet giving an opinion. I'm not going to be the person making all the laws. They're going to have to get experts. They are obviously going to have to make up a big list, different types of guns, different elements of guns that they're going to need to look at, and there probably will be guns that slip through the cracks, and there will be loopholes, and there will be problems with the law, because that's what happens with laws. Laws are not perfect.
But it allows legal 2,000 other types of gun that are identical. Identical in the way that they function, in how fast they fire, in the type of caliber that they fire, in the way they perform. They are indistinguishable from the ones that become illegal. And the only thing that separates the two types, is if you put a plastic handle grip on one, it becomes banned. If it doesn't have a plastic handle grip, it does not become banned.
Laws have to have experts look at them. They have to be fine-tuned. They have to be adjusted. They have to go through a whole process. I said in a tweet, I'm proud of the fact that I don't know much about guns. Commenters were like, oh my god, you're proud to be ignorant? You really need to know about guns if you're gonna have an opinion about guns. This is not about my opinion about guns. This is about my opinion about gun violence and mass shootings. When it comes to actual guns, my opinion about guns is fuck guns. I don't care about guns. I don't care about the differences between guns. I don't have any desire to shoot guns. All I know is that they kill people, they're very dangerous, they do not have the utility of, say, knives. Why don't you ban knives? Well, we need knives because we need to cut things. Do we need a combat knife? No. Not unless we're going into combat. So would I say, maybe we should ban combat knives? Yeah, sure. Because there's no utility for a combat knife. It's designed for combat. Is there utility for a car? Yeah. It goes on the road. It's transport. Can you use a knife or a car to kill people? Yes, you can. You can use anything to kill anyone. You can hit someone with a piece of wood, like a 2x4. What do we use 2x4s for? We build houses with them. I would say that the utility of a gun is not of enough worth to a society that is not in some sort of systemic danger to even justify their existence among the general populace. There's only two arguments that they have for guns being anywhere, which is leisure, like hunting and so forth, or even just target practice, something like that, and defense. That's it. But as for the semantics around guns, you can't just keep saying, actually, this gun's semi-automatic. Like a semi-automatic can't kill a ton of people, and that it wasn't just used to kill 17 people. It's not an assault weapon. Did it kill 17 people? Yes. Can you kill 17 people with a knife? It's a lot harder. Could you kill 17 people with a car? Yeah, you probably could. But you also need a car to drive places and go to work and so forth. So the issue with these semantic-based arguments is that they do not change or adjust the reality of the actual situation. All they do is muddy the issue and confuse people, which I think is the purpose of that anyways. It's up to the lawmakers to find the experts to draw these distinctions and to close loopholes in laws. The old classic guns don't kill people, people kill people argument is very much a low-hanging fruit argument because it's based on a total straw man of what people who want gun control and stronger limits on guns say. The argument that gun control people use is that guns can be used to kill more people more efficiently, and that's why they're dangerous. And as I've said, that their added function to society is low enough and obscure enough that you could afford getting rid of most of them. That's it. But nobody ever argued that an AR-15 wandered into a school and killed somebody and there was no one pulling the trigger. It was magic. It was floating around. And guns, they just fly around and they kill people. It's just, wow, oh my god. Who the fuck has argued that ever? It just shows they don't care about what the other people are saying. They're just saying, leave my guns alone. I love my guns. My guns. No. All I need my guns. You're saying you think guns kill people. Doesn't make sense. It's a total straw man. I'm just trying to protect my guns. Leave me alone. They just want the guns. Anybody who says that somebody who has an AR-15 or whatever it may be is not also pulling the trigger from a place where they were shaped into taking that action is an idiot. I certainly wouldn't argue that. Once upon a time, or a few years ago, conservatives and the right wing were the people who loved law enforcement, and they could always justify and even celebrate at times shootings of unarmed black people, and they could always say that black person had it coming, they deserve to be shot, they were reaching. They were reaching for a gun, so they had to be killed. How dare you besmirch law enforcement? How dare you say that police could ever do anything wrong? You fucking liberal scum. That's completely gone. It's completely changed. With Trump warring with the FBI over all of the investigations around Russia, the right wing and conservatives are now the people who constantly denigrate law enforcement. And that's come to even more of a head in the Florida shooting because Scott Peterson, a 54-year-old deputy sheriff with the Broward County Sheriff's Office, arrived at the scene but did not go in.
What I saw was a deputy arrive at the west side of Building 12, take up a position, and he never went in. I think it was upwards, I think he remained outside for upwards of 4 minutes. After seeing video, witness statements, and Scott Peterson's very own statement, I decided this morning to suspend Scott Peterson without pay pending an internal investigation. As is his right, Scott Peterson chose to resign.
And a lot of people are blaming him, at least for more people having been killed because he did not go and confront the shooter. Now, my opinion on this is actually at odds with some of the survivors of the shooting, who have said how disgusted they were and how miserably Scott Peterson failed and how there's blood on his hands and so forth.
You could say something to him, what would you say?
You failed us. You took an oath and you broke your promise. And that's disappointing. And I'm disappointed in you.
Now, although I agree, obviously, what he did wasn't optimal and did not achieve good results and probably resulted in more people dying, I will say that's a fucked up situation for anybody to be in, even a trained sheriff. And that hurts the narrative that the good guy with the gun is always going to get the job done or going to achieve something. Because even in war, soldiers get freaked out and they don't know how to react, and when shit's exploding around them, they lose their nerve. Peterson himself said he did a good job by calling in the location of the shooter. I can't agree with that. It wasn't a good job. He didn't do a good job. But he also said he was confused about where the shots were coming from. He thought they were coming from outside, according to his lawyer, and he said that he was trained to seek cover and assess the situation in order to communicate what one observes to other law enforcement. Consistent with his training, Mr. Peterson took up a tactical position between the 700-800 buildings corridor corner, the statement said. And President Trump called him a coward and said he did a poor job and said he himself would have rushed into the building and saved everybody's lives.
What he did, he's trained his whole life. There's an example. But when it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened, but he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that.
You know, I really believe, you don't know until you test it, but I think I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think most of the people in this room would have done that too, because I know most of you.
Now, survivors said that the Broward County Sheriff's Office let them down. I think they did, but I think more profoundly, the entire American culture has let them down. Because there should never have been a kid in that school with an AR-15. And a sheriff who is trained to deal with certain situations potentially shouldn't be expected to have to be a fucking superhero taking on some kid with an incredibly deadly weapon in a confusing situation where he doesn't really know what's going on. The American gun culture allowed that kid to get into that school with that weaponry and to even get that weaponry in the first place. And although it's easy to blame the sheriff, and it's also easy to see how he didn't help the situation, it's a little bit fucked up that American society is relying on some random 54-year-old sheriff deputy to go into a building and play a superhero, save all these lives, get the fucking, I don't know, Congressional Medal of Honor, when he doesn't know where the gunfire is coming from, he has no idea who's shooting, how many people have a gun, or where they are, or what's going on. And yeah, I think it's a convenient scapegoat. So for once, I am kind of standing up for law enforcement here and saying, that was not an optimal performance, they could have done better. Absolutely. More people died because of that decision, possibly. But I also understand the difficult position that they were being placed in. And I think the Peterson guy is a convenient scapegoat to get attention away from the fact that that situation should never have existed in the first place and is a symptom of a society which is obsessed with these weapons of death. So I got in an incredibly annoying argument with a gun advocate on Twitter. They just would not listen to what I was saying, so I'm going to explain it again here. I had said America has a shocking gun violence problem. It has an incredibly high gun murder rate compared to other developed nations. And the person replied to me, yes, but the homicide rate is not so bad. Well, the homicide rate for America is poor compared to other developed nations, but it's still a different ballgame from developing nations. Most of the top countries with the highest homicide rates are in Africa and Latin America. The homicide rates defined as the number of deaths by homicide per 100,000 people of the top 20 countries are shown in the chart below. The US was ranked 107 out of 218 countries, according to data from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. For example, the homicide rate in my country of New Zealand is 0.9 per 100,000. Australia is 1 per 100,000. Canada is 1.4 per 100,000, but America 3.9. It's got over twice the homicide rate of Canada. Still, keeping it in comparison to other countries which are a lot worse, Mexico is 15.7, so there's quite a spread between 3.9 and 15.7, obviously. And Venezuela is 62, so they're just off the charts. Okay, we might say that America's homicide rate is relatively decent to the world at large. It's certainly not good compared to other developed nations, but it's relatively okay. No, I said, I'm talking about gun violence or gun-related deaths. And this person replied, well, if it's not talking about homicide, what's the point? The only thing that matters is homicide. It doesn't matter how many people die by guns. The gun violence rate is irrelevant. People will just find other ways to kill people. They'll kill people with knives, they'll kill them with cars, they'll kill them with swords, they'll kill them with whatever other range of things instead of guns. Even though, despite having far fewer guns, Venezuela also has the second highest gun homicide rate. So even though they have few guns, those guns are being put to great usage. And Mexico, for example, has a lot of cartels and drug gangs who are shooting up a storm in that country. Yeah, guns are a problem in all of those countries with high homicide rates. And South Africa, which has a very high homicide rate, also has a very high gun homicide rate. And a good counter to the narrative from racists who say it's all about those violent, evil black people. Turns out that America has a worse gun violence rate than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, violent gun deaths in Cape Verde, South Africa, and Lesotho are higher than America, but America has a higher gun violent death rate than Guinea-Bissau, Sao Tome and Principe, Swaziland, Central African Republic, Togo, Cameroon, Ethiopia, and I'm assuming many more. Those countries obviously have a much higher ratio of black people, but America has more shootings. And I like this addition in this article. One more way to consider this data. The IHME also estimates what it would expect a country's rate of gun violence deaths to be based solely on its socio-economic status. By that measure, the US should only be seeing 0.79 deaths per 100,000 people, almost 5 times less than its actual rate of 3.85 deaths per 100,000. So if it's all about those evil black people, why does America have a higher gun rate than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa? Racists. You want to say because people will find other ways to kill people, and the United States homicide rate is relatively not bad, then doing anything related to guns is pointless and you shouldn't bother. But most developed nations have not only a lower gun homicide rate than America, but a lower gun violence rate, a spectacularly lower gun violence rate than America. And it is kind of comparing apples to oranges. Like, homicide encapsulates everything, whereas gun violence is just talking about guns. And on that issue, America is just off the fucking charts. Now, I guess it's a matter of whether you think that killers should be roaming the streets with guns or roaming the streets with knives. And them not having guns gives them less of a chance to kill people on as large a scale, although they then immediately say you can kill lots of people with a car, you can kill lots of people with a fertilizer bomb or whatever, therefore leave guns alone, even though those are not particularly related to each other. It just means, yes, dealing with crime is to an extent somewhat a kind of game of whack-a-mole. It always has been and it always will be. Just because other things exist doesn't mean guns should be everywhere. I don't know how this is an argument. The point is that America does occupy a particular space in terms of gun violence in the developed world. Although you could say getting rid of guns would not be the silver bullet to getting rid of homicide in America, the idea that it would have any negative impact, especially compared to the rest of the world, is just inane and doesn't make any sense. What you would be doing would be reducing gun violence. People always go on and on about Chicago. Well, there's an opportunity to actually do something about it. Get guns off the streets so that people are not killing each other. And that's another argument people come up with. Well, you know, these scary looking assault rifles and AR-15s and semi-automatics, they're not the ones doing all the killings. It's actually the handguns that do the killings. Then get rid of them too. How is that an argument against guns? Actually, these guns are worse when it comes to killing people. Okay. Then thank you for adding to my point. People don't talk about the fact that in neighborhoods where there are a lot of shootings and a lot of violence, that those neighborhoods are clearly not benefited by having guns. We never really talk about that. People say, look at Chicago, look at the murder rate there. Look at all of these savage people killing each other. But they don't go on to say, with guns. And they don't go on to say maybe they should not have guns in those neighborhoods. Maybe they should close down the gun stores. Maybe they should go in there and take those guns away. No, because it is their right, damn it. It is their God-given American right to have their neighborhoods flooded with guns, on top of all of the other social problems that exist in those neighborhoods, that produce crime, that produce broken families, that produce substance abuse. No, you never hear them say, and also we should get the fucking guns out of there. They just say, look at those savages killing each other. And they end it there. And actually there is some truth to this argument that it's about culture. It's just not the culture they're thinking of. It's gun culture. Now this is a fun one. Donald Trump recently has started demonizing video games and saying,
we have to look at the internet because a lot of bad things are happening to young kids and young minds, and their minds are being formed. And we have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts. And then you go the further step, and that's the movies. You see these movies, they're so violent.
Now, not only conservatives, but for example, Al Gore's wife with the Parent Music Resource Center, PMRC, in the 1980s, have tried to blame many of the social ills on things like computer games and violent movies. But basically every study that has ever looked at this has said that there is no correlation or causation between violent video games and movies and violent behavior and actions. There have been studies that have shown that video games can make people more aggressive. There's a far cry between being more aggressive and being a murdering psychopath. The crux of that information is how they're choosing to interpret it. Somebody like Donald Trump is interpreting that as that's why you get these mass shooters like this. You get these people killing and going around and committing all this violence because of these video games. We can see it because lots of kids play video games and it makes them more aggressive. Although I could agree that that might have an impact on society in some way, it could potentially increase crime across like the swath of all of society if it is making people more aggressive in ways. But there's a huge leap between a game makes you a little bit more aggressive and maybe somewhat decreases some of your empathy, and going into a school and shooting it up with an AR-15. Like, that is a very, very big leap. There's a huge gap between more aggressive behavior and shooting up a school. And I just don't buy that entire distance between those two things has been bridged. Certainly not to the point where you could blame mass shootings on violent video games. You could say maybe that's a reason why kids are having shorter attention spans. Maybe they are displaying a bit more aggressive behavior. But that would also suggest to me that them not having weapons of mass death would be a good thing. Also, some researchers have said that they may be creating a false linkage between games and these more aggressive people, because they may be people who gravitate towards more aggressive games because they are more aggressive people. It could be partly due to personality. How can you figure out the link between what somebody sees on the screen and what they associate that with in real life? I don't know how you could figure those kinds of things out, but I'm willing to say, based on the research that is out there, that it points to the idea that video games make people more aggressive, but I totally reject the idea that that just leads to mass shootings. I think that's just demonizing games because you need a scapegoat to get the attention away from the real issues in society. Now this is a little bit of a weird one, because this is about the left, not the right, not the conservatives. After the Las Vegas shooting that left 58 people dead, I was surprised by the fact that I spent most of my time on Twitter actually arguing with left-wingers. I expected to be fighting with conservatives, but that was not the case. Apparently on the what I like to call further left, there are a lot of people who advocate for guns because they think minorities and trans people and so forth, groups which are a lot more powerless in society, that they need guns, and that gun control measures only serve to take guns away from those underserved minorities who apparently need guns. Now, the more I talk to people like this, the more they sound exactly the same as the gun fetishists on the right, and it's hard to distinguish between their arguments. Many of the people on the left are basically just saying, we need to resist government tyranny as well. We just have to do it from a different place, where one day the government is going to come for a trans person, and that trans person needs their weaponry. They need their stockpile so they can resist the stormtroopers coming in the door. And back in the day, who did they take guns away from? The Black Panthers. They took the guns away from the activists. They took the guns away from the people actually fighting the power. So if there's a gun ban, or if there's gun control, that's who it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt those poor people. The poor, underserved people. The people who have benefited so much from having guns everywhere. It's a stupid argument. There is no difference between that and stupid, ridiculous right-wingers saying, the government's gonna come for my gun, so I have to resist the military. The only difference is that they believe that it's more plausible that the government would come for gay activists and trans people and lesbians and disabled people and non-binary people and leftists and so forth. But I would say functionally, what can you do with these guns? If you have a ton of guns in your house, in your car, everywhere else because you believe that one day the government is going to come for you and you're a trans activist or something, or you're a communist, and then one day the government does come for you and you bust out your gun, what's going to happen? They're going to kill you. You're just going to get killed. You're going to die. If you're a black person and you have a gun and you're driving around in your car, does having that gun in your car make you more safe when it comes to law enforcement, or more liable to be killed? And we all know what the answer to that is. You're way more likely to be killed if you have a gun on you. You're not going to achieve anything with that gun. It's not going to help you. These poor and disaffected communities are really struggling and suffering from lack of guns. They're very much underserved, and that is so stupid. What have guns done to help any of these fucking communities at all, outside of some fantastical vision of using them to resist tyranny, just like the right-wingers? They have done nothing but great harm to minorities. And they're probably a lot more likely to use those guns to fucking shoot themselves. And I think people on the left who have that position are just as stupid as people on the right who have the same one, and they both share this fantastical thinking. You're not going to resist tyranny, you're going to be fucking killed. That's it. End of story. I know a lot of people will have watched this video up to now and just be saying, Tim, you've just been complaining a lot about what other people have been saying. You have no solutions of your own. You don't actually want anything that will actually help anybody. You just hate guns. Well, I do hate guns. But putting that aside, the funny thing about this is that because right-wingers have been pressured so much, they are actually starting to try and put forth things that sort of look like solutions.
Will this bill make a huge investment and dramatically improve school safety, in hopes of never seeing another tragedy like this again? Will this bill provide more funding to treat the mentally ill? Will this bill give far more tools to keep guns away from people who should not have them? The answer to all three is yes. And that is why I'm signing the legislation today.
At least things that I think would help. They've actually started talking about things like banning bump stocks, which I think is quite low-hanging fruit because the NRA and others don't have as much issue with that as other things because it doesn't affect their bottom line very much. Fixing the NICS, or National Instant Criminal Background Check System, to flag people that shouldn't be able to buy guns due to mental health issues and domestic abuse problems and so forth. Raising the age of buying an AR-15 to 21, which I think is kind of stupid. I think they should just outright ban them, but I guess it's something which the NRA doesn't want because it would affect sales. I don't know if conservatives have talked about this, but closing the gun show loophole where you can actually bypass a background check by buying guns from gun shows. Conservatives are probably against this, but a gun buyback system where they are incentivized to sell or pass guns on to the government, and I think those guns should be destroyed. But of course, conservative heads would explode. There's no way they'll support that. Reduce the number of guns in the system. I think that would be a fantastic solution, something really good. I probably wouldn't ban guns outright, but I would have incredibly stringent background checks, potentially disincentivize people to even buy guns, because it's such a fucking hassle to go through all of the hoops and tick all of the boxes that eventually you're just like, you know, it's too much of a hassle to even have a gun. That would be fine by me. I'd even increase the wait time for buying guns, even though gun advocates have said the wait time doesn't impact anything. If somebody wants a gun, they will wait that amount of time. Alright, well, still let them wait, make it inconvenient. There's a whole range of things, and I also saw an interesting idea about
gun violence restraining orders. The orders would allow family or law enforcement to petition a court and bar a dangerous person from having guns.
It would be a tool. Ultimately, laws are only as good as the ability or the willingness to enforce them, but this certainly would have provided an option that today does not exist. If today you believe someone is going to do something like this, you can report it, but there's very little you can do to remove guns from someone.
So there's a whole range of things. And they say, well, you just want to make it so the bad guys can get the guns, not the good guys, because the bad guys will get it on the black market. No. Fuck up the black market. I say invest a fuck ton in destroying the black market. I think it's a worthy cause, and I think it's something that they should invest in. The final point I'll make in this one is just the idea that someone like me, a foreigner, hates guns and hates the Second Amendment of the United States. Mind your own business, New Zealander, you scum. To which I would say, yeah, I do. I think guns are worthless. I would much rather shoot somebody or shoot anything in a computer game than in real life. I mean, it may be nice to shoot a gun on a shooting range, shoot a target or whatever, but is that worth the payoff for the incredibly detrimental impact that they have on the world at large and the great amount of damage they've done to humanity? No, I don't think so. Do I understand gun usage in the context of wars, sometimes existential wars, where you actually have to defend yourself against an encroaching army and so forth? Yeah, I definitely do. But the same weapons have been used to commit genocide and do horrible massacres and commit untold violence. So why anybody would go out of their way to fetishize these objects of death is beyond me. And I think it's a just sad and horrendous thing that America has such a gun culture, and it makes me feel sad for that country. Somewhat makes me feel pity for the people who believe in it so adamantly. The Second Amendment of the United States, I believe, is anachronistic, which is to say it had a strong purpose when it was written, which was they were concerned about the existential threat of the British and perhaps other nations to the continued existence of their republic, which is reflected, for example, in a quote attributed to Benjamin Franklin, where he answered the question, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? With a republic, if you can keep it. They were concerned about losing their country. That's why the Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, gun advocates always ignore the first half of that sentence, which is a well-regulated militia being necessary. Necessary means it's something that you have to have. That's what necessary means. They're saying you have to have a well-regulated militia. If you have to have a well-regulated militia to secure your free state, because without that, some other force is going to destroy your country and take away America. If that is the state of your country, then you cannot infringe upon the rights of the people to bear arms, because the people will be in the militia and they will need the arms to defend the country. So when people say it was intended to fight against tyranny, I believe that. I think that's true. But that's also why it's anachronistic, because outside of what some conspiracy theorists think, America is not at risk of being plundered or destroyed by some other force. America is a country. It's solidly a country. The only thing that's putting it at risk of breaking apart is insane secessionists, really, and that's it. So I'd say, based on the fact that it's an incredibly outdated notion at this point, they should repeal it because it's worthless. The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution has no purpose in the modern age, in the modern era. It's anachronistic. People say, you cannot change the Constitution. Like, yes, you can. No one has ever changed anything in the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. But many amendments have been added since the Bill of Rights, and others have been repealed and taken away. There's no reason, there's no other amendment, there's no anything that says that you couldn't repeal the Second Amendment. And I know that because of the gun culture there is not the political will to do that. But I think it is a worthless amendment, which is fucking up that country, and it may have had some use in the early days, but now the only thing that amendment is achieving is bloodshed, death, and violence for that country. That's the only thing the Second Amendment is achieving. And I wish more people on the left, particularly in America, because I'm just a disgusting foreigner who has to shut the fuck up, would have the guts to say they don't fucking need the Second Amendment. Fuck the Second Amendment. I know I'm in the minority with that point of view, and I'm gonna get a ton of hate in the comments, but I don't fucking care, man. I think I'm tired of seeing this gun violence, not just in America, but around the world, including in those other countries that have higher homicide rates. I think guns just don't help civilians in many cases, in most cases. So that's my final thoughts on the gun issue. I thought I'd just leave you with one brilliant moment of Dana Loesch, who is the spokeswoman for the NRA, completely fucking herself up on Twitter. I'm constantly met with the criticism that I don't know anything about guns. Because you don't know about guns, you have to shut the fuck up. You can't say anything about gun policy. But here's Dana Loesch, the spokeswoman for the NRA, talking about Senator Dianne Feinstein being wrong about the AR-15. Feinstein is incorrect on saying that the AR-15 began in the battlefield. It was first a civilian firearm that the military then modified to create the M16 for their use. Now obviously Dana Loesch knows her guns. But actually, no, she's wrong. M16 was actually based on the Armalite AR-15. The Armalite AR-15 was used by the military. It was not a civilian weapon, and it was based on the AR-10, which was another military weapon. So she's completely wrong. She must be right that the AR-15 was a civilian weapon. She's the spokeswoman for the NRA. Turns out she doesn't know her guns too well, too.